Hi guys, it's Kelly and I'm back with another video. Today we're going to be working with a floral stamp set. This is from Clearly Besotted. It's called Sending Sunshine, and you can see these are very clearly sunflowers. I'm working on Canson watercolor paper. This is the Monteval Aquarelle watercolor paper, and this cuts much bigger than my card front, but I wanted to give myself plenty of room. I didn't really know what my composition was going to be. And I'm stamping this, I think I use scattered straw, but you just want to stamp in a lighter distress ink color if you're going for a no line look, which is what I'm doing here. I have my Daniel Smith watercolors just laid out in this. I've had several people ask about this palette. This palette is from Ranger, and it is actually an alcohol ink palette. But it works fantastic for watercolors as well. So it's very thin. It's got a lid on it. I really, really like it a lot. So anyway, mixing up my colors here. I really love the stamp set. I think the sunflowers are beautiful. But in my own mind, I kind of have a little bit of a block as to what sunflowers should be or should look like. And let me tell you, it's always pretty much yellow. But I wasn't really feeling a yellow flower. So I decided that I was going to switch it up. I am using a mixture of the Quin Rose and the Quin Purple. And we're going to I'll explain the watercoloring because there's going to be so much time for me to talk while we paint this. Oh my gosh, it took a long time. But anyway, so working on petals that are not next to each other because I don't want them to bleed together. I am putting down my darkest color. I am I'm rinsing off my brush, picking up clean clear water, blotting the very bottom edge of the bristles so that I don't have a lot of water, and then I'm just kind of smoothing that out. I wanted to make sure that each petal was still a little bit damp because I want to go back in and drop in the mixture of the two. So the flower is going to look purple, but the majority of the pinkish purple is going to be on the tips of the petals. Now, I've been doing this kind of technique for a minute and practicing it, and I got a little ahead of myself with the 4 petals. I thought that I could do 4 at a time. It turned out to be just a little bit too much. So I did have to go back in and just kind of like re-moisten those petals in order to be able to drop the color in. So don't get too big for your britches like I did. Just, do them at a pace that you're comfortable with. What I ended up doing was anywhere between 2 and 3, which is was just kind of like the perfect speed for me. I felt like I could manage my water and my pigment really well. So yeah, just don't feel like you have to do a whole bunch of them at the same time. Now I like to, because I like super intense color and I know how much watercolors dry back, as I'm moving along to the next petals that I am, putting down that darker color, blending it out with the water, I will go back and pick up more pigment and drop it into the petals that I've already done that are still wet. That's just because I like to build up color. I want them to be, bright and bold and kind of in your face. You certainly do not have to do that. If you want a softer pigment, then just skip that, or don't do it as many times as I did. So just again, moving on, this whole painting, because there's a lot of petals and sunflowers and they're smaller. In this particular stamp set, they're smaller. So it took me, I want to say probably about an hour and a half total. I think I had a little over 2 hours of footage. But I am, as you can see here, I am going to go ahead and speed it up. I showed you the painting of the largest flower. And originally I was going to leave in the rest of the flowers as well. But I have to tell you, I was bored to tears watching myself. I was so bored even just sitting here watching it. So just an FYI on that, I'm going to show everything was the same. I did all of the flowers the same. And, I'll show you the centers and the leaves and all of those things. But I just could not even imagine that anybody would want to watch the whole thing, because I didn't. But anyway, Here you'll see I'm going back now that the other petals are dry. I kind of did just like every other one. I'm going to go back in and start to hit the ones in the middle. Here's something that I learned with no line coloring. One of the reasons why I love that bold black outline is because everything kind of has its place and it doesn't get mushy and everything's very distinct and clean looking, and that makes me happy. And with a bold black outline, I can do that very easily. I can very easily achieve those looks. That black outline is a separation. And so I have a tendency to get kind of nervous when I'm doing no line coloring because I feel like it's going to look mushy or there's going to be no separation. And there was part of the time that I was doing this where I was like, you should just stop painting this because this is not going to come out. Don't listen to that voice. That guy's a jerk. It came out fine. And with watercolors, a lot of times the edges kind of dry a little bit darker, you know, when that pigment is pooling on top. And so as it dries, it creates its own separation. Now, it's not going to be as in your face as a black outline, but it really does create some separation amongst those petals. So just hang with it. Keep going until it's dry. The other thing that I wanted to do to kind of just set those petals apart is I went back in, and where some petals were set behind, I added some darker pigment. Again, these are dry, so I have to go back in with clean, clear water and just kind of lay that down in order to be able to add in that darker pigment. Here's how we're going to switch up the sunflower. So I got the whole center wet. I went in and added some of the purple. It got a little bit crazy, so I blotted it up. And then I'm going to add in this yellowish green color. And right now it's not going to, you're going to be like, why would you put that in the center of that, Kelly? That looks terrible. And right now it kind of does, but that's okay. We're going to come around to it in the end. So there are these little teeny tiny petals that are behind even those further layers of petals, and that's what I'm working on now. They aren't very big. And the other thing, one of the other things, I learned a lot of things, and that's why it's really good to like practice your watercoloring because you just keep learning things. For these smaller pieces, I learned that I don't need to put in the darker color and then blend it out and then come back and do it again. Not that you can't, you totally can. And that will work. But with the smaller pieces, a lot of times I kind of switched back and forth between doing it the way that I did all the other petals and then doing it where I blended out that color actually with the pink. I'm calling it pink, but it's the mixture between the two, just FYI on that. And then, you know, I could go back in and add darker color where I wanted it to be, you know, since this is a multi-layer flower, there's going to be lots of darker areas. So just kind of working on that until I was happy with the way that it looked. And then here the center is completely dry now. And so I'm going back in with a very pigmented, I'm not using a lot of water on my brush, and I am doing little dots all around the edges. And I'm going to do the same thing with the mixture between the two, and then I'm going to do the same thing with clean clear water. The reason that I'm doing this is because it will allow my sunflower to start to look more like a Gerber daisy, which I am much more comfortable with making a bunch of different colors. Here I am doing the kind of the detailing on the flower, so I'm using that Quin purple in a pretty concentrated consistency so that I can go back in and add in the lines of the petals, add in any areas where I want it to be super dark, and then I'm going to move on to the middle of the other flower. And I'm doing the same exact thing, even though this flower is like a side view, you can still see the center of it, and I wanted to, you know, make sure everything was consistent. Now that the center of the largest flower is dry, I'm going to do the same thing with the dots to just kind of create that texture. So I had a slightly darker concentration, the mixture between the yellow and the green, and then it just looked a little bit flat to me. So I'm going to go back in with an even darker color just around the edges so that it looks like the little petals, like the miniature dot petals we've created for the daisy look. do have some depth, that it is a little bit darker. And I'm going to, again, create that same look over on the one that is facing the opposite side. So just doing just little dots of color. And I dropped my, you can see there, disaster struck. So I dropped my paintbrush with the dark purple on it. There isn't anything, I mean, it is what it is. Accidents happen. Thankfully, with watercolors, they pick up really nicely. So what I ended up doing was going back in, putting down a layer of clean clear water, blotting it up, doing the same thing over and over again until I remove the majority of the color. But I will tell you that I didn't get all of it. But we're going to use some things as an art of distraction later on to kind of help us out with that. But don't just, like, if that happens to you, don't just call it a wash. Don't just be like, oh my gosh, I painted this thing for an hour and now I dropped my paintbrush and it's ruined. It's not ruined. Don't panic. I used to tell one of my officers at work, when they're new, everybody sounds like they could be on a lockout, which is where you lock your keys in your car. And when they're calling into the radio, they're calling in like, radio I'll be out with. And you're like, whoa, dude, it's a lockout. Like, let's bring it down a notch. So I used to tease him that every time he got on the radio and started talking, it just sounded like he was saying, everybody panic, everybody panic. So it's become just kind of like a joke between the two of us. But don't panic. There's no reason to panic. There's a way to fix whatever it is. And especially with watercolors, I mean, you saw it was dark purple. I dropped right on there, dark purple, and was able to kind of pick it up just by working quickly. So for the smaller flowers, I am using a mix of the Quin Rose, and now this time I'm using the Quin Gold. And so, orange and purple, well, yellow is the complement to purple, but they're close enough for government work. And so they look really nice together. I continued to, bring in that pink by adding that to the base of my petals and then just kind of blending everything out together. And even with the smaller petals, because of the way watercolors work and how they give you kind of that darker edge when you're using them right next to each other, the way that they dry, even these little tiny ones don't get mushy. But you definitely want to make sure throughout all of this, but especially with the little teeny tiny stuff, that you're not using a ton of water. That's not going to benefit you. So now we're going to go in and start painting in these centers. I just use the, I can't remember the name of the yellow one. Sorry, it's yellow, people. And most of the yellows I think will probably work fine, but this is like a bright yellow. And then I'm going to start painting in the stems, just in order to have some kind of continuity, keep the, color family the same. I'm using that yellowish green mixture to do the stems on the smaller flowers. And then for the stems or the leaves on the larger flowers, I opted to go with a teal. This is, I think, ultramarine turquoise, I think. Don't quote me. Everything's linked below on YouTube as well as on my blog. But I just really love teal and purple together. That's just one of those color combos that I've always been a fan of. The same thing with like a lime green and purple I really love together. And so that's how I kind of came up with my color palette for this. So for the leaves, I'm doing the same thing. You just want to make sure that you're putting down enough pigment to carry throughout the whole leaf. Because as they, especially the ones that are on the bottom left, right now I'm doing the ones on the top, but the ones on the bottom left, there's a lot of surface area to cover, and you want to make sure that the pigment's going to be able to cover that whole area. And obviously you can go back in and drop in more color as you need. I just try to get it moving, get that color moving really well my first go around without just, straight painting it on there. So speaking of my job, we have started doing a youth group, and we've been doing it for, a couple of months now. And one of the games that one of the themes that we did was we played icebreaker games. This was a couple of weeks ago. And so we did one where like everybody went around and told their biggest fears. We did another one called 2 Truths and a Lie, which I think is super interesting. So when you go around the circle and you say 3 things, 2 of them are true, 1 of them is a lie. I don't know if you ever had to play like these team building exercises or anything at work, but it was super fun to learn about the kids. It was super fun to learn about my coworkers, and it's really interesting to see what like people pick. Because obviously, you're telling things about yourself, but also like everybody wants to be the one who like stumps people with their truth. So here were mine. My 2 truths and a lie were, I have never broken a bone. I am an only child, and I almost did not graduate high school. Those are my 3, 2 truths and a lie. So naturally, as you work with people, you learn things about each other. Some of them were really easy to pick out, like my guys, lies. Other ones were more difficult. So it was just really interesting to hear what they came up with. So like one of them was he had a 4.0 in college. He was born at home on his parents' couch, and he I can't even remember what the last one was. But anyway, the truth was, or the lie was the 4.0. He's like, I actually had a 3.8, and I was like, nice distinction. But he was actually born at home on his parents' couch, and I was like, I did not know that, and that's very interesting. Another guy, his was, he owns 6 dogs, he leases his truck, and he used to pick up dead bodies for a living. And, the lie is the dogs. He really did used to pick up dead bodies for a living. So it was just super interesting. So here's what I want to do. We're talking about this card. I did the ink splatters to kind of mask the paintbrush dropping, and then I'm going to do the white dots because that's kind of how Gerber daisies look. Then I'm going to stamp this sentiment down using my Misty so I don't mess anything up. But anyway, what I want you to do is I want you to, in the comments below, I want you to guess what you think my lie is, and then I want you to tell me 2 truths and a lie about yourself. Like, won't this be a fun way to get to know each other? And then in the next video, I will tell you which one is correct, which one is the lie. But I think it'll just kind of be fun. Don't mind my phone going off there. I just think it will be super fun to just kind of like hear everybody's stories and see what other people think the lie is. Because we all have like, everybody thinks their life's so boring, but we actually all have like really super interesting things that have happened to us. And I think it'll be fun to learn those. So anyway, I wanted to accent I popped this up on Fun Foam just to make it a little bit more interesting since it is just a painted piece. And then I'm going to accent the sentiment with some clear Nouveau drops. This is the Morning Dew color. And then that is the whole card. So thank you guys so much for joining me, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.